I've been thinking about doing this video for a while now. Actually for several months. It's a story that happened to me, or not happened to me. It's a story that I saw firsthand. It's a story about a suicide. This suicide happened in January of '96. It was a close friend of mine, a guy called Lightfoot. Now, Lightfoot and I became friends back in '93. He had just been discharged from the Army. He had gone to college, and then he, not dropped out. He left for a couple of years to go and serve in the Army. He served 2 or 3 years as an airborne ranger. And he fought in Desert Storm, but sort of like peripheral action. I mean, I don't even think he saw action. He implied it, but he didn't actually see it. Now, Lightfoot was a very particular individual. He was a big guy. He was about 6'2", 6'3", about 220, 230, you know. He was usually shaved bald, and he was half black and half white. His mother was white, and his father was black, and father was out of the picture. And he'd grown up between his mom, who apparently, from what I could glean, didn't provide a lot of stability for him, and his grandparents, who he was very close to. And his grandparents had given him a lot, not materially, but in terms of formation, in terms of direction, you know, help growing up, see? So anyway, he was back in college, finishing up. He was going to graduate in '95 with my class, and then near the end, you know, it just all went south. Now, he was a conservative, right? He wrote for the conservative newspaper, and like I said, he had been in the Army. And he often would go around campus in his full uniform, right? Complete with the beret, right? Like, I mean, it was kind of funny, you know. He'd be like, you know, going around with, like, you know, the insignia and everything, you know, the green uniform and the beret, and he'd go from class to class in full uniform. He said that he had to do it because he was doing the physical training for the ROTC candidates. But I thought it was bullshit at the time. I thought it was bullshit. I thought he just liked it. He missed the structure of the Army. He missed that rigidity, like, do this, do that, go here, go there. You know, he missed it, you know. And anyway, Lightfoot was a pretty solid student. And he was pretty involved in conservative politics. He was sort of like, you know, he was the kind of guy who you could see would be some sort of advisor to somebody. Not like a candidate, not like a political candidate. He was too intense for that, because he was an intense guy. Big guy, strong guy, very intense, with that, like, cafe au lait color, you know. He tended to stare at you, you know, unblinking for a little bit too long for comfort, you know, and that was a little bit unnerving, but, you know. And sometimes he did it, you know, just to mind game people. And we got along. We were pretty good friends. We did a lot of stuff together. We played squash together, and a couple of times he took me out on his what he called patrols, which were a little weird. I mean, at the time I realized how weird it was that he'd wander around campus. He'd do like a complete you know, patrol around the perimeter of the campus after dark. I'm talking like 11, 12, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, right? With this rifle that he had, okay? I'm not kidding. A loaded rifle. Now, I know it was loaded because a couple of times he let me shoot it at like a tree or something. It was the first time I'd ever shot a weapon in my life. You know, he was wound up tight, you know, and even I could tell at that time that this guy was a keg of dynamite that was just waiting to go off. And eventually it did, in the most ridiculous manner possible. See, what happened was, okay, see, he was supposed to have graduated a number of years before, right? But he hadn't, because he'd gone to the army for 2-3 years or whatever. And so the system or somebody didn't know that, and so he kept getting these alumni, black alumni solicitations for money. I mean, like, you know, you go to any Ivy League school, and apparently any school nowadays too, but, you know, as soon as you graduate, or they think you graduate, they start hitting you for money. They've been hitting me for money for 22 fucking years. You know, religiously. Every week I get an email or two. And no matter how much I unsubscribe and tell them I'm not interested, I'm not going to give you money, they still send me the shit. But anyway, so he got this letter from the Black Alumni Association or whatever, asking for money. And it set him off. And he wrote a very, very nasty letter. You know, he printed up on the campus printer, which was, you know, free. And he sent it to them from a post office box in New Hampshire. And this letter was basically directed to the treasurer of the Black Alumni Association, basically saying that he was going to find him wherever he lived in Georgia, I think, something like that. He was going to go down there to Georgia or wherever, find him, kill him, and rape and murder his wife. It's just fucking insane, right? And he sent it anonymously. And of course, you know, a letter is, of course, sending a threat via the post is a federal offense. And so the FBI got involved, and they lifted fingerprints off the letter, and it was no trick at all to cross-reference that with all the FBI's database, which includes the military's database of fingerprints. And lo and behold, they came up with his name in about, you know, it was like a week, okay? That's how quickly they came up with this. And they sent a couple of FBI people to campus, and they arrested him, right? Now, they put him in a federal detention center in New Hampshire, and then they sent him, I think, down to Virginia or someplace like that. And then they put him in a psych evaluation because they figured, you know, the kid had to be crazy. And on top of that, there was this, the general vibe was that the authorities in particular didn't want this to blow up into a big scandal, and they didn't really want to wreck his life because this guy was a talented kid, you know? A talented kid with a lot of problems. But, you know, he got good grades, you know, he was, you know, involved in a lot of different activities. He's just a little screwy in the head, you know. I mean, I don't know, some shrink would be able to give a better idea as to what would fix this kid, but it doesn't matter. The point is, see, he went to jail. He went to jail, and then this psychiatric evaluation, a psychiatric prison, basically. And he was there, I don't know, altogether like 4 months. You know, he got kicked out of college, of course. And eventually when this got to, you know, in front of a judge, the judge... and I mean, the prosecution stuff, they came up with some sort of plea deal, and eventually all he had to serve was, you know, 6 years of probation and time served, you know. And so he wound up going back to Washington State, where he was from. He was from Seattle, as a matter of fact. And, you know, all the aspirations he'd had, because he'd had aspirations to working at some think tank or something like that, because he was like an intellectual guy. Very smart, very diligent. One of those guys who like grinds out every little citation, every little quote, you know, he's one of those diligent guys, right? Which makes sense, you know. And anyway, he got kicked out of college, and all that life was gone, right? And this happened late 94, something like that. Now, when this happened, I mean, the whole campus was abuzz, and everybody distanced themselves from him. But like I told you before, I was a fairly ostracized kid in college, and I was realizing how horrible he must feel, right? So when he was sent to this federal prison, I got in touch with him. And I remember plugging in quarters to talk to the guy in some payphone somewhere. And then I was in touch with him when he was in this psychiatric hospital where they were evaluating him. Psychiatric hospital sounds like, you know, really, you know, scary, but it wasn't that big of a deal. He told me. He said it was like a lot of guys were there with just, all kinds of different crimes. A lot of white-collar criminals were there, like lawyers and stuff, who were trying to get out of a terrible, terrible prison time by declaring themselves insane, because only somebody insane would have done some of the stupid shit that they'd done, And that's what he basically was doing. He was there in the psych ward to convince a judge or somebody that, he was too crazy to have done this. And we talked a little about this thing, and he knew it was stupid. He knew after the fact, and he was just, and he was shaking his head, and we had a laugh about it. But, one of those bitter laughs, because the kind of life that he'd envisioned for himself was gone, right? And I could, because of the other story time I told you about, I could completely understand his situation, right? So anyway, he eventually, he got sentenced, time served plus 6 years probation, which is no big deal, he told me. And it didn't sound like a big deal, because he could still travel and stuff, but you just have to get like written authorization and stuff like that. But anyway, he moved to Seattle, and he quickly found a job at some furniture store, like Bed Bath, no, not Bed Bath & Beyond, Crate and Barrel, one of those, Pier 1, I don't know. The point is he got a job there, and he was working there, first as a sales associate, and pretty quickly he told me, because we were in touch, and I'd already graduated by this time, he climbed up to like a low-level management position. I mean, he could see that he had some sort of future ahead of him, right? Not the future that he envisioned, not the kind of political, governmental kind of work that he had wanted, the kind of work that he had aspired to, but it was a pretty decent life, and here he was, a fairly young kid. He must have been like 24, 25 at that time, and he was on his way to, to a life. But then what happened was that somebody anonymously tipped off his employer about his criminal record, and he got fired. He got fired from the job because of, he had lied on his application, because on his application he'd said that he had never been convicted of a crime where he had to plead guilty to a crime, to a felony, in order to get his sentence of, time served plus 6 years probation. So he got fired on the spot and escorted out by the police from his job, and he told me about it, right? I'm pretty sure I was the only guy he was in touch with, his only friend at that time. And we spoke. I was living in LA, barely getting by, trying to break into the film industry and stuff. And I spoke with him like a week before Christmas of '95. Yeah. And he was pretty low. Well, no, he wasn't pretty low. He was, in actual fact, he was pretty good shape, because that was a conversation where he told me about getting fired from his, furniture job, the furniture store job. And he told me how, he was all right. And he laughed about it, and, he was pissed off about it. It wasn't like one of these fake laughs, like when somebody's like really hurting inside, but they like fake laugh, ha ha ha, I'll make it through. No, he was like, fuck these assholes, man, and we laughed that he was an ex-con, right? And we laughed about it, and I wished him a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, because I was traveling somewhere, I wouldn't be able to get in touch, something like that, I forget what, and that was the last time I spoke with him. And then in January, early mid-January, something like that, I get a call that he'd killed himself in Seattle, and the circumstances were fucking chilling, okay? Well, apparently, he couldn't find work, and he had looked here and there and everywhere for a job, and, no work, And so he'd gotten into this habit of like patrolling again, and he had a weapon of some sort, a rifle. Not the same rifle from college, because that one, they'd actually taken it away from him. It was a Czech rifle he had back in college, but then later he had acquired some other weapon. Anyway, the upshot of it was that he was found on like this high-rise office building that he had somehow broken into, I guess, but I was never clear as to how he had gotten up there. But he had gotten up to this building, and it was like a 20-story building, and he had gotten up to like the 19th floor into like some bathroom, and he had shot himself there with this rifle that he had. But it turned out that it was a lot more chilling than that, because it turned out that he had gotten into this office building. He'd gone up to the roof of the building, which was downtown in Seattle, and he'd set up some sort of like sniper's nest, basically. And he'd been there apparently for like a couple of hours before he'd, waiting for the dawn, I guess. Waiting for the dawn and to start shooting people, I suppose. And he had gone down to the bathroom, probably to pee, right? Or who knows what he was there for. And he shot the wall of the bathroom. He shot it for some reason. Probably to see if the rifle actually worked, And then I think that he must have come to his senses and realized that, what he was doing was completely insane. And he shot himself. Okay? And he was found, like when the cleaning people showed up, like 6 or 7 in the morning, a couple of hours after he was dead, right? He wasn't found by police and there was no big struggle, nothing like that, no. He'd gone up to this building to basically probably shoot a bunch of people as they were going to work in the morning, and somehow miraculously came to his senses and decided to off himself instead. Now, that's a true story. And, it's, I think about it a lot. Of course, I'm not because I'm thinking of doing anything remotely similar. Of course not. Okay. I think about it because of all the talent wasted. On YouTube, there's some kid who's committing like a form of suicide. He's raising it to like a fucking performance art. He's putting up these videos that are just moronic, and people are thinking he's a fool. He's just burning his credibility in his channel, and it's a kind of suicide. But this story that I'm just telling you, what happened to this kid on YouTube, it reminds me of my friend who shot himself, I had another friend who killed himself, a guy called Mark Rice, but that was different. He had some kind of like severe depression, and he just circled the drain, and eventually he hung himself. And it was a tragedy for everybody involved. But it was different because, you see, with Lightfoot, there was this sense of enormous talent. I mean, incredible talent. He was a sharp guy, okay? Just a very, very smart individual. More than equal to myself, probably superior, quite frankly. Certainly better read than me. And he was a sharp, smart man. And he could have been anything. And yet, I think the demons of his own upbringing and his own background just weighed against him. He hated black people, even though he himself was half black. Perhaps it was a projection of his hatred towards his father who had abandoned him. I don't know. I mean, it's pure speculation at this point. It doesn't matter at this point. But there's a lesson to be learned from this. See, I understand what happened to Lightfoot. I mean, I understand it really, really well. Because he came to the conclusion that there was no hope, that there was no future, that he had no future. And he thought that this conviction would always haunt him, and that this conviction would taint him. This whole incident. Stupid, idiotic, ridiculous. Because this threatening letter, okay, he did threaten to kill a man and rape and murder his wife, okay? I mean, let's not, pretend otherwise. But it was trivial and stupid, and it was just I almost want to say a flash in the pan, in the sense of just a spark of anger, and probably a hatred towards black people that had nothing to do with black people, but had everything to do with his own background and his own upbringing that had been very difficult and very lonesome. And it had caused him to do this and ruined his life, okay? And then when he thought that he was trying to get out of it, that he could get out of it, it came back and bit him in the ass, and he lost his job, a job where he could see that he had some sort of future, and it's gone, right? I'm just like out the fucking window, right? And so he was thinking to himself, there's no future. There's no hope for me. Now, the guy was crazy. Let's face facts. I mean, if you're going up to the roof of some high-rise in downtown, in the downtown of a city, and you set up a sniper's nest, you want to kill people, you're fucking out of your mind. And so that's why I thank God, or whatever higher power influenced him, or maybe it was just luck, that he sort of like snapped out of it and had the wherewithal to realize that this would be horrifying for all involved and for a bunch of innocent people, and he shot himself, and that was that. I mean, we should count ourselves lucky. I mean, we're not talking about, you know, the tragedy of '96 where some crazy man shot up 30 people in downtown Seattle before he was finally taken out by a whole team of SWAT guys, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about some very, very obscure suicide of some random kid that happened 20 years ago. But it's a haunting story because there's so many lessons to be learned from it. But principally of all those lessons is that everything passes. See, about 5 years after he shot himself in the winter of 2001, I was driving through Seattle, and I went to where he was buried. And hang on a second. You know, he was an only child, right? And I can't imagine the suffering of his mother, you know, to know that her only child had killed himself. I mean, you don't get over that, right? And I remember when I went to see his grave in 2001, right? I thought to myself that it was just 5 fucking years. And everything had changed around. For me, you know, I mean, between '96 and 2001, I had like a fucking odyssey, right? And I thought to myself that he would have had that kind of odyssey too. And more odysseys, you know? And you see, my thinking is that, see, a suicide doesn't solve anything. Right? Because whatever suffering you're going through, right, it'll pass, no matter how bad. I mean, you could be like in real pain. I've been in real pain. Everybody has been in real pain. Everybody's got a sob story. Everybody has gone through misery, right? Everybody goes through days where they think that they can't go on. And everybody, at one point or another, has thought that, you know, better end it. Okay? I don't care what your name is, everybody has thought that. Sometimes kids think about it when they're like 13 or 14, but it's more like the fantasy of like, ooh, you know, if I were gone, then they'd know that they'd, you know, been bad to me and they'd feel all guilty and shit. But that's like immature and trivial kind of daydreaming shit. And you're not even really thinking, it's not suicidal ideation. It's more like imagining everybody else feeling guilty about you having done it, and, you know, the pleasure that you derive from them feeling guilt, which is childish and immature. I'm talking about really offing yourself, of thinking to yourself that you can't go on and that your life is not worth living. And I would give anything to be able to go back and tell Lightfoot that, you know, by that stupid phrase of the gays, you know, it gets better. Exactly right. It gets better, because nothing bad lasts. You know, Robert Frost said, you know, nothing golden lasts. Nothing gold can stay, right? Well, yeah, but, you know, shit doesn't stay either. No matter how shitty the situation, it fades. You get over it, right? It gets better. Mm-hmm. And I would tell him that. And I would tell him to... that it would be over. 20 years ago, this shit happened. 22 years ago, or whatever. 23 years ago. Now, all these years later, he'd be having a life, knowing how energetic and talented and smart he was. He would have figured something out, some kind of business, something he would have moved forward, moved on, and he would have a family and a life, you know. And all that never happened, you know. And those children that he could have had, and the love he could have had, the love he could have given, the love he would have inspired, none of that happened, you know. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that never forget that in time, all of this will just become a spot in your rearview mirror. Everything. I mean, no matter how bad the situation, no matter how horrifying, horrible the situation, it will become a spot in your rearview mirror, and you will be able to laugh about it. Because I know if Lightfoot were alive today, we'd be talking about the time he was stuck in a criminal psych ward, and we'd be laughing about it. Okay? Because nothing gold can stay, but nothing shitty can stay either.